The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Big Money Siege, let's start with Leafs Corner for today's edition of the CJ Show. Yanni Hakanpää off of LTIR. He makes his Leafs debut Wednesday night for the Toronto Maple Leafs against Washington. Been a long time coming for Yanni. I know I want to ask about what's next for the defense core or anything else the Leafs could be up to, but it is still cool to see that he was able to make his debut on Wednesday after a long injury layoff.
For sure. I mean, there were some people out there that wondered if you'd ever see him suit up for the Leafs. You know, when they announced on July 1st, you know, Brad Treliving mentioned verbally that they were going to sign him. Of course, that contract didn't come till September. Here we are in November. He's gone through a conditioning stint. You know, I think that there was certainly some people in the hockey world that just thought that the nature of the knee injuries that he had in Dallas and that ended his season, last season in March, you know, were probably going to cost him his career. I think some doctors even had some concerns along those lines. And, you know, the Leafs traveled over to Finland 3 or 4 times in the summer to get comfortable with the idea of signing Hakanpää to work with him. And he insisted he could play. And, you know, who knows where it goes next, because things like health are hard to predict, impossible to predict in the best of cases. And obviously in this case, he has, you know, come through a pretty serious injury recovery. But for the Leafs, you know, I do think it gives them some nice depth. You know, when you look at Hakanpää, he's probably the sort of defenseman they'd be trading for at the trade deadline if they didn't go and sign him last summer. You know, he's sort of the model of, you know, Joel Edmondson, Ilya Lyubushkin, guys we've seen them get at previous deadlines, but the hope is that they can integrate him. He can play this year. I mean, he's starting with Morgan Rielly, which kind of gives them an interesting set of balance. Now, there's more options, I think, for the coaching staff than Sheldon Keefe had, you know, certainly last season with the Leafs group, just, you know, with adding a Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Now you have Hakanpää in the mix. Connor Timmins has emerged and, you know, played a pretty regular role for the Leafs this season. So, well, that's a long way of saying that if he's healthy, I think this will be a great signing. But this is only really, I mean, it's not step one, but it's step one in terms of seeing him in the NHL as a member of the Leafs.
For sure. Earlier this week, the Leafs put Matt Benning on waivers, and obviously they're still up against it with the salary cap. What's next for the Leafs on that front in order for them to find ways to alleviate it, or if they're still going to be in the LTIR? What can you say about their situation?
Well, you know, with Benning, I think they'd still be open to moving him if something came along that made sense. You know, for the time being, though, there's no harm in having him play for the Marlies and have him as a depth member of the organization. You know, really their issue is not cap related in the moment, in the here and now, as much as it's roster size related. That, you know, they've been at the maximum 23 players. You know, that gets somewhat, you know, relieved here in recent times because Max Pacioretty went down with an injury. Obviously, Austin Matthews has been out here for some time, and so, you know, they've got a lot of moving pieces. It's hard to say on any given day how that's all going to go. I mean, part of it will be when those players are healthy. But, you know, I think that the Leafs at least are in a moment where they don't have to make a trade. You know, they did get Benning through waivers, got him down to play in the AHL. And, you know, he's just another weapon in the arsenal, I guess, potentially for them if they run into, you know, big injury situation later in the year. Or as I mentioned, I do think they'd be open to moving him if someone wanted to go trade for him. He's a veteran guy. He's a right shot. You know, coming off a significant injury himself, you know, had hip surgery and missed the back half of last season in San Jose, and, you know, was a bit of a cap casualty himself in that deal for Liljegren that San Jose wanted his contract in that trade. So, you know, right now the Leafs are okay, but on any given day with the injuries, that the number of injuries they're kind of dealing with, you know, we'll have to see where things land.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll never talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs ever again.
Well, we probably will. Austin Matthews has skated twice.
We probably will. That's clearly a joke.
I just saying, you know, Austin Matthews has skated twice in the last 10 days or so that we're aware of anyways. So I think that, you know, that's probably we might have buried the lead on, you know, what's going on with the Leafs. And, you know, some of that is eased. They won the first 3 games without Matthews in the lineup. And so, you know, it cooled the situation a little bit before losing that game to Ottawa on Tuesday. But, you know, obviously if it ends up, I mean, I've had no one say it's going to be long-term, so I don't want to raise any alarm bells, but, you know, the longer it goes where he's not, you know, progressing, getting back towards the lineup, I mean, this is that's the kind of hole for a team you can't replace. It's the sort of thing, a few teams out there are having to play without some top players, but the Leafs are having trouble scoring at 5-on-5 without him in the lineup. And right now it's still a TBD on when he's going to play next.
Okay. Obviously, we'll be on top of that as it happens. I want to get to Pittsburgh. Earlier this week, a report from DK Pittsburgh Sports seemed to suggest that a fire sale could be upon the Penguins. Everything except Crosby must go. And then during insider trading this week on TSN, Darren Dreger seemed to put some cold water on that. Where are we at with this particular situation with the Pittsburgh Penguins, Siege?
Well, I'd say the Penguins are looking at their situation with clear eyes. I think that Kyle Dubas isn't kidding himself here about, where his team sits. As we enter play on Wednesday night, the Penguins are tied for last in the league with a minus 21 goal differential. I mean, they have been getting their butts kicked, and they've won some games here, of course, but it's been a tough sled. And I'll point you to what we saw last year from this team when they were 10 points or so out of the playoffs with a couple weeks ago before the deadline. They went and they traded Jake Guentzel because they recognized that he was a valuable piece that they could move before the trade deadline. I think if they're in a similar spot, as this season progresses, if this doesn't get turned around, I certainly think we're going to see them trade more players. And they've already moved Lars Eller here this week, trading him back to Washington and getting a third and a fifth round draft pick. So, I think we're somewhere between the two polls, maybe that, I didn't see the first report, so I don't want to look as though I'm coming right at that. But what I know is they're open for business. They're open to ideas. Certainly, I think they're going to be willing to discuss their players. And I think we're going to see more players traded out of Pittsburgh if this doesn't turn around. But that being said, I also don't think they're going to start in the next week just trading anything that isn't nailed to the ground. So, the truth is it's somewhere in the middle. The Penguins have 5 players with full no movement clauses, Crosby, Letang, Carlson, Malkin, and Brian Rust. So, the main names that are probably going to get people all whipped up, I don't think are in play during the season. I mean, maybe in the off season, you're starting to look at some of those things. But in the here and now, the Penguins do have a number of sort of depth pieces that are on expiring deals. Someone like Marcus Pettersson on their blue line will be pretty highly featured, I can tell you, on the trade board that comes out, especially if they don't come around here soon, because they're going to keep. Kyle Dubas, since he got hired by the Penguins, has been trying to do 2 things at once. He's trying to maximize what they can out of this window while they have these generational greats, but he's also been pretty open. If you go back to Brady, even his first press conference 2 years ago there about, realizing that they also need to retool and be a team that finds that next wave. And so I think the way you do that is if it's not going to be a playoff team, you're going to have to trade away some current value NHL players for futures. And I think that's where they're at. They just don't have to make that call today. Maybe they win 5 in a row from here and everything gets changed. But clearly the Eller move tells us it's not as though they're not open to doing business. And, I think they're one of the teams that have been, pretty active just in terms of listening to what might be out there and what might make sense for them.
I get it. You're right that the Penguins could win 5 in a row and then we change our tune with this team, but there's nothing on this team right now beyond their players at the top that tells me that they could do that. If it happens, I will gladly eat crow on this show, but there's nothing on this team that tells me that they have any type of run like that in them. This looks like a bad situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, I'm not predicting that. I'm merely
no,
just
I'm not saying you are. Just like the fact that, like, that's just my opinion. I just don't think there's anything in them to do it.
Right, except that the guys at the top of the lineup can probably win some games on their own. Tristan Jarry went through his own conditioning stint in Wilkes-Barre Scranton. He went 5-1 down there and had .930 or so save percentage. I mean, so they could get some hot goaltending. They could get a great burst out of, Malkin's had a really good productive start to the year, actually, given where he's at, Crosby. So I guess I can at least dream of circumstances. Like, I don't think those guys are going to give up on the season. No matter what we think, right? And I don't think any of them, nothing's changed since the summer in terms of none of them are anxious to get out of Pittsburgh themselves. Like, I think they want to be part of a solution. They want to be part of a winning situation. So, I think if you're in management, you got to there's some hard decisions probably ahead. And, ultimately it probably means trading away some good players, decent players anyway, ahead of this trade deadline, which isn't going to make the guys that were, at the top of the roster feel great. I don't think Sidney Crosby loved losing Jake Gensel, just because they were such a great duo for so long. And it's not a good sign about the direction things are going big picture. So there could be more of that this year. They're probably one of the more interesting teams in the league just because I feel like we just keep staring at this thing and we're like, the meteor is getting closer to Earth. The meteor is getting closer to Earth. Like, when's it going to crash? And, through, almost 20 games of the season now, like, it looks like it's going to crash. It looks like this could be a third straight year out of the playoffs, which I think is going to have some pretty big questions being asked of that franchise if that's where it ends up, come next summer.
For sure. We're going to obviously talk more about the Penguins this year. It's just, I don't know, man. If they find a way to prove me wrong and turn themselves into a better team than what they've shown right now, that'll be the day for me. I just do not have faith in this team. I don't have faith that they're going to be able to turn around. And I know people in Pittsburgh feel the same way too. I'm just wondering what's next. I mean, Mike Sullivan, we've talked, like, he doesn't look like he's going anywhere. The cornerstone pieces at front, they're not going anywhere. So I would be so frustrated if I was a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. This situation just is not ideal.
Yeah. I mean, there were Chicago fans have been, LA fans have been, when you got those banners up there that are at least in recent memory, that there's usually a price to be paid for the teams that won the championships is either you make some bad decisions with contracts or the players that would deliver those championships, they just get to an age where they can't make the same impact. Or just the price of trading away all the draft picks at the all-in trade deadlines. I mean, all that stacks up against you, right? And, I guess the one piece of warning I'll just say, and it's funny, I didn't expect that I'd be like the one sitting out here like a Penguins, like, hey, wait a minute. But like the East to me, like after the top teams is a little mediocre. And, last year I didn't think Washington was going to be a playoff team, and yet they sort of scrapped along, and it was kind of a weird chase for that last playoff spot, and they found their way in. And so I'm just saying, I'm not willing to rule them out yet, but I mean, you also can't ignore the results. I mean, the fact that, as I said, if you have the worst goal differential in the league after a month of play, I mean, that's not screaming good things about where you're headed. But we live in a 3-point league. They do have some players that have done some special things. Maybe they catch some fire here and at least hold that fire sale off that everyone's trying to bring to the front door for them.
We'll see. The Montreal Canadiens entering Wednesday night's games have the exact same goal differential at -21, and the Penguins have 2 more points than them. And I mean, I get they're in 2 different places, but I kind of have them in the same world right now. They're both trash. Anyway, the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Wow, negative, Julian. Funny, like the Canadiens are worse than they thought they'd be.
Yeah, that's true.
The Canadiens didn't necessarily think internally this was going to be a playoff year, but I don't think they thought the first stretch of this season would be where they're at. And maybe in hindsight, obviously they lost some players like Patrick Laine to injury. Might have been counting a little bit too much on someone like Kirby Dach coming off of this very significant injury, missed all of last season with. Having so many young players on the blue line. I think there's a debate in Montreal internally. They probably need another veteran defenseman to help stabilize things. But if they go and trade for that player, does that block the path or the development of one of the young guys that's supposed to be part of the future? I mean, Montreal's in a weird spot too. It's a tough league though, man. It's some teams make it look easy and they're in the playoffs every year. The Tampas and the Bostons and lately the Floridas. But the truth is if we look at the other side, I mean, there's lots of tales of concern, and those would be the things I'd be concerned about as a Penguins fan, right? Or do we go through a Buffalo-like era? Obviously, that's at the far end, but Detroit, a team that hasn't been in the playoffs forever. Montreal, I mean, these rebuilds don't always go smoothly. I mean, Edmonton got to a great place, Game 7 of the Cup final last year, but man, they had to make 4 number 1 overall picks before, they went through this run that they've had the last, number of seasons where they've clearly been a top team in the league. I mean, it can be a long road from the rebuild to the rejoicing in the streets.
One Montreal question before I get to Edmonton. You mentioned, maybe they're thinking of getting a veteran defenseman. Have you kept track of all these reports of whatever meeting might have taken place between Martin St. Louis and Kent Hughes over the weekend, and rumors of them adding a coach. It may have been Gerard Gallant. Did you catch wind of some of that kind of blowing up Habs Twitter the last few days?
Yeah, but I don't get it because it's total nonsense. Like, it's just not, it's like, it's not true. So,
right.
I don't even know where the discussion is because this meeting that was reported on didn't happen. Gerard Gallant is not coming to coach the Montreal Canadiens. I don't think that there's a coaching change at all in the offing there in the near term. I mean, so it's one of these like ones that it took on a life of its own. The way stories, often do in hockey markets. But yes, I saw it, but I do know that it's just not. It's not a reflection of reality.
No. But now I'm wondering, even if that was kind of, we know that's not true. I mean, I wonder if the Canadiens at any point did consider the possibility of adding someone to Martin St. Louis' coaching staff. If it is worth them having some kind of veteran presence around Martin St. Louis. I know we've discussed him before on the show, but I am also curious if it was something they've even thought about, period, before that all blew up over the last few days.
If they have, I'm not aware of it. And, the report was pretty specific. Like, it said that
Yes.
they met in Toronto during the Hall of Fame weekend. So, it was, the implication was that something was happening imminently. And it didn't. I mean, it puts a team in a weird spot because if you get in the business of refuting reports publicly, you might get trapped down the road when something's kind of true and you don't really want to address it. But that was just so preposterous and just frankly wrong. And, that they came out and squashed it. But no, I haven't heard of anything like that. Look, we're at the point where they're at the difficult part of the rebuild, right? And expectations are clearly gone up in the market anyway, in the media, I think, as well, or that covers the team on a daily basis. And so some of this stuff now takes on more urgency. My sense of the Canadiens is they're actually much more patient at the management level with sort of what they see as the process of what they're going through. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, I don't think they're happy about it. I think they were hoping and expecting they'd be a little better this season than they have been to start the year. But I don't think they're like freaking out going like, what do we do now? We got to fire coaches and like you're not turning around the big ship here. Like, I think that they're on a path and they're going to stick to it. And, they believe in Martin St. Louis. I mean, he's the same guy was getting like the flowers, it feels like, for 2 years. And all of a sudden
he was.
And look no one is above criticism or no one's above, having questions asked about their performance. I mean, this is a high stakes business we're all in, and especially those that are, paid to make the decisions and run a team like Marty is. But I don't get any sense that that's not a change they're looking to make. If anything, I think they're looking to maybe add a player and see if that might help stabilize things versus, anything a little bit more dramatic going out the door.
Okay. All right. Thanks for talking about the Canadiens there. The Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid, 1 point away from 1,000. Gets a 4-point night earlier this week against the New York Islanders. He's one away. He gets a chance at getting to 1,000 against the Nashville Predators on Thursday. It feels like a matter of when, not if, for Thursday for me. But hey, if it doesn't work out for him, he always has Saturday night against the Toronto Maple Leafs to get 1,000 points. Thoughts on the undercovered and underappreciated Connor McDavid?
Well, selfishly, I will put my hand up and say that all week I was hoping he would come to Toronto on Saturday night with a chance to get to 1,000. Just because I'll be in the building. I think it'd be pretty cool in his hometown. The whole Hockey Night in Canada aspect. I mean, I'm a sucker for a good story, a good narrative, and I thought that would have been a tidy one. But after he got 4 points on Tuesday, there's just no way that's happening. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but the Oilers' history in particular against Nashville is one of these weird things where the Oilers have just feasted on the Predators for years. I think Leon Draisaitl has something like 2.5 points a game on average against the Predators in his career. And it's not like the Predators have been bad during Leon Draisaitl's career, right? Like, this has been a good team, but you do see it throughout the league. Like, there's certain teams that have another team's number. That's Edmonton and Nashville. This game's at home. I just think with Connor McDavid needing 1 point, I mean, Connor McDavid starts most games with 1 point already like in his back pocket, right? The question is he going to get 2 or 3 that night? So, I think we see this record fall on Thursday, whether it happens Thursday or Saturday. He's going to be the 4th fastest in history. He's going to be the 4th youngest in history to get to 1,000 points. I can tell you, this is where I'm starting to feel a little bit old too, Julian, because like I very distinctly remember the start of this guy's career. And so just to think he's already at 1,000 career NHL points, or 999 as we're recording this right now. We don't want to jinx anything, but I think he's going to get that next point needed. That's pretty wild stuff. He already passed Phil Kessel. Phil Kessel had a tremendous NHL career. Connor McDavid already has more career points in the NHL than Phil Kessel. And you could probably go down the list and find a bunch of others that had really, really good careers that, this guy's going to pass them way before his 30th birthday. So I think it's going to be a special moment, and I do anticipate it happens Thursday on home ice. But if somehow the Predators, lock it down, keep him up the score sheet, I think it sets up for a pretty dramatic Saturday too in Toronto.
I love the fact that Connor McDavid's career is the one that makes you feel old. I was telling someone the other day about how Carey Price and the fact that he's eligible for the Hall of Fame next year makes me feel old. I love that. I'm sure it's someone else, but I love the fact that you mentioned Connor McDavid as that watermark for you. Well,
it's more like, time passes differently for everyone, just in terms of our relationship with it or what we remember. I remember I was still working at Sportsnet when McDavid was a rookie, and Edmonton did a swing where they played in Montreal. It was on the Super Bowl weekend where they have 2 afternoon games for the Habs, and Sportsnet sent me to Montreal. And, it was the first time I'd seen him live in the NHL, and how exciting that was, how ridiculous. Like it felt, it was like a big moment. And in my mind, that was really not that long ago. Like that feels like a fresh memory in a sense. Like I'm not digging way back at some time capsule here to unearth that. And so, part of it is just how quickly he's amassed the points, right? It's unreal, but also time is passing pretty quickly here. And, 1,000 point milestone that's a career topper for most guys. Connor's going to get there. He's still on the way up. Maybe he's not even on the way down yet. He's going to get to 1,000 points. It's crazy.
He's not even 30 yet.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, though. Like his best individual season, this is saying something, might still be in the future. Like it's possible. I'm not saying 100% that's the case, because he's had some ridiculous years, especially the last couple. But he might still have another level, or might have a year where he's getting a bit more puck luck, and whatever happens, he could still have a 150 point season or something in him. Like I just wouldn't rule it out, given his talent level and what we see from him. Even this year was a bit of a slow start by his standards. And obviously, he missed time with that injury, and then he comes back and it's just like 4-point night, 3-point night. He just makes it routine. The hard part is when you talk with these guys, like what more, there's nothing new we can add to the conversation about how good the guy is. But I do think it's a big moment for the league. Sort of a special year. Between, you got Crosby, 600 goals coming up. Obviously the Ovechkin goal record is coming into focus because he's had such a hot start to the year, trying to chase down Wayne Gretzky for the all-time goals record this year. McDavid hitting 1,000. There's a lot of big round numbers out there for some of the game's marquee talents.
One more Connor McDavid question before we get to stick taps. What's your favorite Connor McDavid highlight to this point in his career? I know it's difficult to choose one.
It's probably there might be some recency bias here, but the goal against Dallas, when they clinched the trip to the Cup final, was pretty special. And he also had a pretty sick assist in that game, and that was the only goals Edmonton scored. If you remember, they didn't play particularly well. They didn't generate a lot of shots, but they found a way to close out the Stars. I think given the stage and the playoffs he was having, obviously ultimately won the Conn Smythe Trophy while playing on a losing team as a skater. It doesn't happen very often. That might be my favorite, just because he's probably done things that are more ridiculous or skilled. And you're probably going to name one right after I finish talking. But I just think, in terms of the stage, with the chance to go to the Cup final, to produce that moment when his team really needed him, that's the special stuff.
I think my pick is definitely more skilled, but actually, no. Yours is just as skilled, I think, as this one. But Connor McDavid dangling around 4 members of the New York Rangers, and then after he scores, you see his face almost in disbelief at what he's done. That's That's my favorite Connor McDavid highlight of all time. And just seeing his face, he takes the mouth guard out of his mouth and his eyes widen up and he's like, holy crap, did you see that? And then he just starts celebrating. Like, we've all dreamed of being on a highlight reel. We just, and the fact that Connor McDavid gets to do it in real life, amazing. That's my favorite. But the Dallas Stars one, right up there for me too.
There was an unreal one that I was in the building for in Toronto where he went wide and kind of like made Morgan Rielly look silly too. That's
up there too.
Pretty special goal. I don't know if you remember that one, but it just was like, I remember being in the building and you're almost like, what just happened? It was like he bent time and space on the ice in a way you don't normally see, which is obviously why he caught the defenseman the way he did and finished it off. We should be asking our colleagues that watch every game, because I feel like he just does something almost every night that you could be waxing poetic about.
The Morgan Rielly deke, just to add to that, the thing that makes it amazing is how Connor enters the zone and how he's literally looking like at the other side of the rink, and he's looking off as if he's trying to wait for a teammate to make that pass. And then in a split second, boom, he's just cutting to the outside. I'm literally watching the replay as we're talking about this. Cuts to the outside, bounces around him. No wonder Morgan Rielly had no idea what was going on, because obviously his head where he's looking, you're thinking, okay, he's looking to make a play. Turns out he was looking to make a play, just an individual one. That's amazing that we're talking about how amazing that goal is. That could be top three. Not the fact that it's top three. That could just be third behind the two that we mentioned. Like, that would be number one on so many other highlight reels, but the fact that goal could be third is absurd for this person's career.
Yeah, and the thing to me is, like, I feel like if you watch enough hockey, and I can definitely say I'm at this point, I'm sure you are too, like, you almost like even if you don't process everything in the moment, because sometimes a game does happen fast, sometimes you're way up high in a press box, but you can kind of see, like, when something feels off, like, because there's like, it's like a different pattern. It's almost like pattern recognition. There's the pattern of that goal. Like, I'd never seen anything like it. Like, the way he does the deke, the way he fools the defenseman, like, that's where you're like, okay, like, we're literally watching a guy who does stuff you haven't seen before. And as many amazing skilled players there are in the league right now, that's not the case for all of them. Like, and I'm not even talking about the other guys that win, the top awards and they're going to be in the Hall of Fame one day and the whole bit. But, like, he really, like, it's like he has a different level of vision, and obviously his speed is a separator. And he's like a supercomputer out there, and he's against the other best players in the world, but occasionally he makes even them look silly. And that's what's kind of crazy about it all.
Keep it locked here for the Monday episode when we talk about how Connor McDavid got his 1,000th point, whether it happens to be against Nashville or against Toronto on Saturday. Siege, do you have a stick tap before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was thinking I'm going to go Dylan Strome today. And Dylan is really kind of having his moment here at the start of this season. He assisted on all 10 of Alex Ovechkin's 10 goals in 14 games to open the year. A guy a long ago, third overall pick in Arizona, went to Chicago, took a long time, I think, to establish himself in the league. But, over the last couple of years in Washington, he's really become, the sort of player I think that he was expected to be. And it's kind of cool just the way it's all come together, that he's now, the center playing with Ovechkin and setting up all these moments. And in fact, even talked this week a little bit about hoping to be in that picture, the picture that will be, taken at some point when Ovechkin likely surpasses Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. So just wanted to shout out Dylan, because he kind of traveled a long road in a sense, but he's in a really good spot right now. And obviously he's playing unreal. He's, right near the top of the league in assists to this point in the season. And, the Capitals have been one of the feel-good stories of the year so far.
Stories like Dylan Strome further illustrate to me that the NHL needs some kind of official comeback player of the year award. It could be a Masterton thing for him, but like a pure comeback player of the year award where you're going off of a player sort of turning their career around, or at least having some new resurgence. Like, he might be the top pick for that honor, unless I'm blanking on someone very obvious, but that is a really cool story to see him go from a perceived bust to riding shotgun with the greatest goal scorer we've ever seen. Not named Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah. And then he's, as I say, like he's been full value for it all. I mean, it's a good story. And so I want to end the week stick tapping, or end our week on the pod anyway, stick tapping a positive story.
100%.
No cross checks from me.
I will give a cross check to myself, because on Monday, when we went in on everyone who got inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and we spent a great amount of time, and I love that we did, on Scott Burnside getting into the Hockey Hall of Fame, I completely forgot to mention Pierre Hood, the longtime play-by-play man for Montreal Canadiens games, who works for RDS, who went in with the Foster Hewitt Memorial Award. We did acknowledge him for Stick Taps a couple months ago when it was first announced he was going to get it, but I didn't get it. I'm going to be honest with you, it slipped my mind to mention him earlier this week. So I'm going to take the time just to say congratulations to him on a spectacular career. I mentioned it the last time I brought him up, and I'll mention it again. For people in English Canada who don't realize how good he is, people in Montreal, like me, who grow up Anglophone, they'll go out of their way to watch games in French just to listen to this guy call games throughout the week. And that's no shade to guys like Brian Mudryk and Félix Séguin, who do great jobs covering games for their networks. But Pierre Hood is considered the gold standard for calling games in Quebec. As far as I'm concerned, I think a lot of people agree with that too. So congratulations to Pierre Hood on winning the Foster Hewitt Memorial Award. And sorry about not talking about him on Monday. I just wanted to make sure he got his flowers this week.
Well, that's on me too. And I'll say, after we recorded Monday's show, I went to the Hall of Fame luncheon where the media members were honored. Pierre gave a fantastic speech. You could really feel the emotion from him about what the honor meant. He had his daughter there and his partner and some family members, and same to Scott Burnside. I mean, it's kind of cool that the Hall does, single out, a broadcaster, and I guess what used to be a print reporter. I don't know that any of us are print reporters anymore, but sort of someone who's digitally, I guess, writing stories these days. Anyway, it was a cool luncheon, and full marks to Pierre for getting in there. I don't speak French, so unfortunately I don't really have the appreciation for his calls that someone like you would, but certainly have known him and said hi to him over the years, and just seems like a real classy gentleman.
Just watch like a random Canadiens game highlight. Go back to when they were down 5-0 against the New York Rangers and listen to him call that game or something. Even if you don't understand the language, just immerse yourself in the atmosphere of how good that just sounds, even if you don't understand it. And to your point, if even if you aren't fluent in French, for so many people who grew up in Quebec who didn't really understand French, that was an entry point for a lot of people, Anglophone or otherwise, who might not understand the language, in particular when it comes to French hockey terms. Pierre Hood, I think his impact goes well beyond just putting a headset on and putting a mic on. There are a lot of people who enjoyed the calls that he did. And again, good on him for being honored. Good on the Hockey Hall of Fame for honoring him, and also good on Pierre Hood for being honored as well. So I'm glad we were able to get that shout out in. And with that, we are now 10 episodes away from 300. Big money, CJ. Very exciting times. And also, of course, great job on today's episode and putting up with all my silliness and negativity before the end today. We got through it. Yeah,
you turned back. I'm glad. I was worried about you mid show, but you really saved it, and you warmed my heart by the end there, pal.
I could tell too, as the atmosphere changed. Oh, okay, CJ's turning too. Yeah, I don't worry about that. It happens. Get your questions in now. Subscribe to the podcast. We'll be back on Monday. Thanks so much for listening to the Chris Johnston Show.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.